Hello, friends, and welcome back to my channel. I am so glad that you are here today, and I'm super excited that I have a special guest with me today who is going to help me to answer a few questions for you. A couple months ago, we had planned to do this a couple months ago, but a couple months ago, I asked my friends on social media, on our Facebook group, to ask me questions that you had about marriage, about family life, about parenting, and you really came through. You gave me a lot of questions to kind of sift through, and I've been sifting through them now for the last few weeks. And we are today recording this Q&A, and I have asked my lovely friend and one of my assistants, Krissie, to help me today to answer these questions. You know why? Because it always feels a little weird to sit in front of a camera and to ask myself the question at the same time I am answering the question. So I have Krissie with me today, and she is going to help me to ask the question. We're going to just engage as though we were having a conversation about marriage and parenting and family life. And welcome, Krissie. I am so glad that you are here with me today. I love you dearly, and I'm so glad that you are going to join me on this journey today with helping to get these questions answered for these lovely ladies. So welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody. It's so good to be here. Like Wendy said, I'm going to go ahead and start asking her the questions that you guys are looking for answers to. So without further ado, we'll just go ahead and jump in.
Yay.
The first question I have are, what are the ways that you honor your husband during a busy work week? What does that practically look like for you, Wendy?
How do I honor my husband on a regular work week? Well, first of all, what you need to know is that I have some notes that I have taken on some of these answers. So you will see me glance down a few times at my notes because I did do some investigation and some looking into what I would say for these particular questions before. I have a few things that I feel like I do practically. One thing is I send text message to him throughout the day. And sometimes it's just as simple as I love you. I know that sounds funny, but I think that that is a way of just helping to engage throughout the week and throughout the day, especially during really busy seasons. My husband travels a lot for work. And so a lot of times I just want him to know that I'm thinking of him. I want him to know that I thought about him, and I think a practical I love you text is really good. I think also a practical thing that I do is I ask him how I can be praying for him. And I think that this is a huge one. I think that it's really kind of helped me to kind of know what's going on in his life. I know that sounds kind of funny. You know, we live together, we share a home, you know, we're around each other all of the time, but what's going on in his world and what he is concerned with oftentimes isn't the same thing that I'm concerned with, or that I might even know about. I might not even know about it. So maybe it's something with work. Maybe it's a feeling that he's having about us and our marriage. Maybe it's something that he has on his heart concerning a family member. And so that is really practical, I think, is asking him how I can be praying for him. Another thing that I wrote down here is just slowing down to really listen to him. I think that is so important, and it's practical. And I think sometimes, we're just so in a hurry that I think we're like this with people, like, how are you doing? I'm good. You see them in the grocery store and they're not good. They're going through stuff, but they're like, I'm good. I think that is kind of how that bleeds into marriage. We'll say, I'm good. And really we're not. And so I really want to kind of pay attention to his body language. And if I sense that there's something off, I might really take the time to listen. Um, I wrote down a few other things. I try to lighten his load, meaning, are there things that you have to do in maybe for him it's a busy travel season right now, so maybe it's not getting around to cleaning his car. His love language is acts of service. I hate to use love language but I think you'll hear me say that a few times in here because I think it's true. How he receives love is different than oftentimes how we give love or how we're prone to give love. And so for me, like for him, it's acts of service. So it might be just washing his car, or it might be, doing something else around the house that he isn't able to get to. Um, and then the last thing I wrote down is always make him aware that he comes first, knowing that, when he has something that he wants to talk about, or when he has a need, or when he has a desire or a want, or something that he, maybe some frustration, or maybe it's something he's upset about at work, is just knowing that I'm an open door, that I'm always here, and that everything else kind of gets pushed aside. And I feel like everybody that I'm close with in my life knows that about me, that, if you are a friend of mine or you are a family member of mine, that your priority, like I will end everything to like take your call, to take your text. And so I think that that's really important, is knowing he's priority, but him knowing that he's priority is the thing. So yeah.
That's excellent. You mentioned love language. So that brings me to my next question. And the question reads, when you feel like you're missing it
Mm.
in marriage, how do you recalibrate towards each other? Do you use each other's love language?
Yeah, that's a great question. I remember when I read that question and I thought that took some thought to answer that. And I feel like we're all missing it in marriage a lot. I feel like I've never done this before, right? I've never been married before. I've never attempted this before. This is like, this is trial and error, even after almost 30 years. But I did write down some practical things. Number one, I think for me, and this is a lesson that took me a long time to get to learn. This tough head of mine, this was a tough one, is never hesitating to take responsibility for things I need to own. So saying I'm sorry,
Right.
um, and being okay to say, I'm sorry, I did that wrong. I messed up. I want to do over. I'm sorry, I got it wrong. I think that is something that actually, when I do it, I even surprise myself sometimes when I say, you know, I'm sorry that I hurt you, or I'm sorry. And again, I think it's not just being flippant in your I'm sorry, as though it's just something I need to say, but really being sorry specifically for what you did. Like, I'm sorry that I said that. I'm sorry that I made you feel that way. I take ownership and responsibility in that. And I think not only does that shut down the anger and the frustration in him, but it brings me to a place where I feel like I'm honoring God best by doing that. And so it puts me in a good, and it makes me feel good. It puts me in a good frame of mind. Um, the next thing that I would say is to recalibrate is checking the schedule. What am I saying yes to that I should be saying no, at least in a season? I think busyness is the root of all kinds of issues within our parental roles and within our marriage roles. I think that having too much on my plate. So knowing my bent, knowing what I can and can't say yes to, and then are those outside requests just things I need to say no to in a specific season? Because I think sometimes saying no to even the good thing, to say yes to the greater thing, is best. Um, the next thing that I said, and that I wrote down, is talk it out, share feelings. So, like for me, it is always a matter of honoring the way someone feels or the way that I made them feel. And so it's not, I'm sorry you took it that way. But it's, I'm sorry I made you feel that way. That was never my intent. We had this thing when my husband and I did marriage mentoring years ago for many years. We would put our couples often that were, in an argument about something, or they were upset about something, we'd put them face to face. And we would have the one say, this is how you made me feel. Well, then what the other person was responsible for doing then is repeating what that was. So there was no discrepancy, because a lot of times we'll say, this is how you made me feel. Um, you know, you didn't take out the garbage last night. You told me you would, and it made me feel it invalidated my feeling, whatever you'd want to say. And then the spouse maybe heard you say, I'm never appreciated. I'm never, you don't like anything that I do. You don't trust me. It's like, that's not really what I said, but that's what you heard. And so that conversation, I think, that we have with one another, opens the door for there to be no discrepancies over what I said. And then the last thing, which should have been the first thing, is pray. Just pray, 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 pray. Pray for God to reignite that passion back in your marriage, reignite, that love that you once had, and then to increase that time that you have with one another, so that you can put back into the marriage what you once did and how you were once working so hard for it. So yeah.
That's great. So, in other words, your yeses be yeses and your nos be nos
That's right.
is where you're going with
Amen.
that.
That's
And
right.
not only that, but watching your water line, if you use the analogy of, a boat, you have to make your boat float all the
Right.
time.
That's right.
If you're putting too much on your plate, you're going to sink. So
Yeah.
I think that was
Well,
wonderful.
and I think too, our taking that responsibility and owning our part. I think we as women, we don't always do that. We think,
Right.
well, they didn't do this, they didn't say this, they didn't come to me first. We have just as equal of a responsibility as they do. And so taking ownership in the lack of communication or the lack of whatever is missing, that missing word that she used, is huge, huge.
Yeah.
So.
It's our duty as a Christian wife.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, 100%.
Which brings me to my next question. And this is kind of a multiple question, but I
Yeah,
know a lot of women are always asking, how can they show respect verbally to their husband,
uh-huh,
encourage their husbands? How can they kind of build him up to be that spiritual leader in
yeah,
their home?
yeah, yeah. Um, so I think that, and this is a huge one, and this is multifaceted.
Yeah,
Um, it is um a big question that I get asked a lot, and I think that it comes with a great degree of concern. But I think sometimes our concern is he isn't the person that I married. He isn't the person I want him to be. And so we have to be, I
yeah,
think, very careful that we don't inject that into um, our feelings on the matter of him maybe not being the spiritual leader. But we'll address first, how can I show respect verbally? I think that it's huge. And I think a lot of times it does depend on what type of personality you're married to. I think that that matters, because there are a lot of people that you could tell them all day they're wonderful and glorious and beautiful and smart and strong, and words of affirmation may not be necessarily what they best how they best receive love. But I am a very verbal encourager. And so for me, these are just some practical things. I tell him that I appreciate all that he does. And I'm very specific about it. So, it'll be, I appreciate what a great dad you are. I appreciate, like, for instance, my kids just moved out of state, and my husband's back has been, as you know, has been out for the last 3 weeks. And I just look at him wincing in pain. And I think if that were me, I'd be on the couch, and
yeah.
it would take nothing. There would be nothing that could get me off the couch, because I know that pain level that he's experiencing. And yet here he is. He's loading up trailers. He's moving things for the kids. He's, doing all of these great things to help other people. He's always expending a lot of energy helping other people. And so I tell him often, I'm really appreciate it. I really appreciate what you did. I really appreciate that you help the kids. I appreciate that you come home and that you really give 100% in your role as a dad, or whatever. So very, very much appreciate him through that. Um, the other thing is, tell him why I love him. So we used to have this game that we would play often, and it would generally only be about the time of our anniversary, where it would be like the number of year that it fell on. We would say how many things that we loved about each other on for that particular year. So if it was 20 years, we'd say, okay, and when I remember when we got to 20 and I said, now you have to think of 20 things you love about me. And he's like, oh my gosh, you should have given me like, some days to think about it, because, as you get older, obviously that number increases and you're like, I've got to think of 30 things that I'm grateful for, that I'm thankful for. But it then it would bleed into like just date nights where we would say, tell me what you appreciate about me, just three things or three things that you love about me, but tell him specifically why. Not just I love you, because I think again that can be so generic and it can
Yeah,
be so mindless. I love you.
definitely.
In fact, I am so, and this is something about me, I think personally, I really, really do not like the love ya. Like, I don't like that. I've never liked that. In fact, I don't even like love you. I think it is more specific, and it has more emotion and feeling behind it when you say I love you, like me personally love you. So I try to always remember that and not flippantly say love ya or love you. Even in texts, I'm always like I love you. For some reason that's just something that has always kind of bugged me. um the next thing that I wrote down is express how proud I am of him, in especially when I see growth or when I see something that he has accomplished. Maybe it's a task at work, maybe it's a big job that he had at work, or maybe it's growth that you've seen in him spiritually. I think that that's huge. If you see him reading his Bible, or you see him doing a devotion, or you see him reading some great book, or watching some great podcast, or listening to some great podcast or something, to express how proud you are. I think that that is huge. Um, I think also to express your sorrow over the things that you have failed at. Again, I think that goes back to being sorry, genuinely sorry, and then genuinely asking for forgiveness. Like, I'm sorry, I messed that up. I'll try to do better. Or asking him to hold me accountable to certain things. Hold me accountable. Next time you hear me say that, don't go 3 days and be angry with me until it gets to the point where you're so blown up about it, you can't even talk to me. Tell me in that moment, and I will be okay with you convicting me, because I need that. I think the greatest accountability partner that we have oftentimes is our husband. And so, but that's something I think that we can verbally and audibly, communicate. Um, and then be genuinely interested in what his interests are. This has been huge for our marriage. Huge. Ask questions about those interests. My husband loves real estate. He loves the real estate, and he loves the real estate market. Now, listen, I do love going through open houses, and I love the aesthetics of homes, and I love decorating, and I love all of those things. But I'm not like real estate market analysis geek, like, and that is him. And he will look at the market and how it's fluctuating and interest rates and what's available. And, when my parents were looking for a home, my daughter said, does he know, or do they know that da 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 is for sale? And I'll say, well, if they didn't know, my husband surely knows, like your dad surely knows, because he just knows. He knows the market, he knows what's available. And so, that's how he spends a lot of downtime, like in the evenings on his iPad scrolling through real estate. And I'll watch him looking at like millions of dollar homes going, why? Like, we're never going to live in anything like that. Why are you wasting your time doing that? So I think like sometimes I will downplay his interest and I want to feed into those interests instead. And so I'll oftentimes ask him questions like, what is it that you're looking at? What did you learn today about that? And that's a stretch for me, because like, inside you really don't care. But I think that showing interest lights him up. And then all of a sudden he's like, she does care. She does, she does, she is genuinely interested. And I think that shows love. I think that demonstrates love. So anyway. That's all.
That's great. This kind of plays off of the questions that I just answered, but the next question was, how do you honor an unbelieving, unsaved husband?
Mhm.
We just talked about how we honor, husbands and encourage them and things like that. But
Yeah.
an unsaved husband is maybe something a little bit deeper.
Yeah. So I have a couple different sections on how I've broke this down because again, I think that this is a common question. I think that this is probably the most common question I get, especially from young wives, young moms, young wives who want to be good examples for their family, and maybe they are married to an unbeliever. I think number one, I think first and foremost out of the gate is being a good, godly example yourself. I think that this is absolutely necessary, and I think that this is where we are lacking a lot. And I'm not saying that we are not being a godly example, maybe to other people, but it's more difficult to be that godly example for the person that we are most vulnerable with, and it's our spouse. And I think that our godly example is our greatest contribution that we can make to our relationship with our husband. It's the greatest investment that we'll make. I go to First Peter 3, 1 and 2, when Peter is given this great advice, and he is talking about how we have the ability to be the one who can bring our unbelieving spouse to Jesus by
Mhm.
simply the way that we live, not by words, not by our speech. I think, in fact, the less we say, the better off we'll be. But they have to see us living a godly life. They have to see us honoring well. They have to see us following Jesus well. They have to see us steeped in scripture. They have to know that we're praying, not just to hear that we've said we're praying, but actually see us praying. Um, they have to know, they have to see those fruits of the spirit in our life. They have to see joy. A lot of times we're saying, why aren't you being the spiritual leader of our family? And yet the last thing that they're seeing is joy and patience and self-control within us, which are the fruits of the spirit. And so I think that they have to see those fruits of the spirit for themselves. And so I think that that is the greatest overarching thing, is be Jesus with skin on for your husband. Um, that's number one right out of the gate. Um, the second thing that I would say is give him space and time to work out his own salvation. Um, we have this timeline, right? Like we get married, we're like, okay, this is how I thought that it would look. These are my expectations. This is what I thought married life was going to look like. This is what I believe that a spiritual leader should have looked like, especially I think for those of us who come from believing families. We saw a model expressed for us in our parents. And so we say, we want that. And then we're confused when we marry someone who is either an unbeliever, which we shouldn't do, but that's a whole nother video in and of itself. But we have these expectations, and I think that us putting unrealistic expectations on our spouse is not fair. I think that they have to have time and space to deal with things and to do things and to work out their salvation for themselves. And like for instance, um I'm very different than my husband. My husband is a processor.
Yeah.
He needs time. He's slow. I always said I used to kid around with him when we were first married. And I used to say, you're the slowest person I know. He makes decisions very deliberately. He does a lot of research before he buys a product. Um, he's very meticulous about what he does, but I can guarantee that the things that he does are going to be good. They're going to be good. They're going to be perfected. Whereas I tend to be the one who flies by the seat of my pants. I make quick decisions. I kind of live in the moment. And so we balance each other out that way. But I also have to realize that if that is his natural bent, I have
Right.
to give him space to work that out in his timing. I can't rush it. And I certainly can't rush God. And I don't want to do that. Um, I think supporting his interests again is very big. I think that there are certain, I think that in our walk with the Lord, and I'll just say this from my perspective with Trevor, is that our walks have always been different. They've always been different. They've never been, my walk has never been equal to his. And I think the tendency often is to, if we're up here and he's a little bit slower down here and he's not quite caught up, our tendency is to be upset with that and to be like, I think from this perspective up here, why won't you think this way? Um, I think that we have to we have to realize that he has to process through things the same way that you did. Um, for instance, there are certain people that I watched really early on in my relationship with Jesus, people that I was greatly influenced by on social media, on TV, who were big names. And I would listen to their stuff and I loved it, and I learned a lot in that time.
Sure.
But now that I've grown, I don't listen to them anymore. And it's not necessarily for reasons that they are completely false teachers. It's just that the level of teaching, I've kind of advanced past that level of teaching. And if he wants to listen to them or watch them or engage with their material, I don't ever want to be like, I would never do that. Well, right, because I'm here and he's here. The levels aren't the same. And so just making sure that we support him in every single step that he takes and realize that every step is an arrival. Like every step needs to be celebrated.
Yeah.
For sure. Um, the other thing that I wrote down here is huge. Let him lead. Let him lead. I think that we want to take the reins. We want to usurp that responsibility a lot and say, well, if you're not going to do it, I'll do it. That is not our role. That is not our role. Our role is to support. Our role is to uphold. Our role is to come alongside of and to be that helpmate. I think that that is one of the number one failures often in marital relationships, especially where the spouse, the woman, is further along, or the
Yeah.
woman is the believer and the male is the unbeliever. Let him lead. Let him lead how he's going to lead, and be okay with it. And shut your mouth about it. Say less. And that's like I said, that's always the sticky note that is on my desk. Say less. Say less. In fact, that's my next one. Say less. Listen. Don't jump to conclusions often about what he's doing or the mistakes that he's making, or um, not honoring well the choices that he's making because they're not the choices that you would make. Um, I think realizing too, at the end of the day, I think about this all of the time. I think about this in my church with my pastor, and I think about this with my father, and I think about this with my husband. And that is, at the end of the day, at the end of our life, they're responsible for us, how they led, how they loved, how they showed grace, how they were a parent. And so that's something I think that we always have to be mindful of. And I think that being mindful of that helps us to live differently with him. It helps us to know our place and to support instead of condemn for the things that we see that aren't going so well. Again, telling him that, we're proud of him. Um, and then again, praying for him, letting him know why we're praying for him, how we are praying for him. I have talked to a few ladies who are married to unbelievers, and they say that they have tried this a lot of times by telling their unbelieving spouse, I'm praying for you. And they've gotten pushback from that, like, I don't need your prayer. And that's okay. You just keep praying anyway. That's when you say less. You don't tell him that you're praying for him, and you just pray anyway.
Yeah.
Um, and so a quick story, when we were first married, I was married to someone who, Trevor wasn't a believer when we were first married. I didn't know that he wasn't, because he advertised himself, if for lack of better words, as a believer. I don't think that we ever had that conversation, Christ follower, but he was a believer, he said. And then we got married and everything kind of shifted because I wanted to do things that involved church, and I wanted to, be involved in ministry, and I wanted to serve, and I wanted to do these things. And he's just like, no, that's for you. It's not for me. And then I'm like, oh, I'm disheartened, and I'm concerned. And so, he says to me, you go find a church, and I'll come alongside of you at some point if I feel like it's a good church. If you like it, I'll like it. So I found a church, went out, hunted, found a church. And then he wouldn't go. And I thought, well, I'll be darned if he's not going to go, I'm going to go. And so I took my daughter and we went every single Sunday. And I remember leaving the nursery one day when I was picking up Chloe from nursery, and I met the pastor in the hallway, and I was just overcome with emotion, and I just started to cry. And he said, what is going on? And I pulled him into his office. I'm like, can I talk to you for a minute? And I said, I'm just so disheartened because I see all these couples coming to church together, the husbands and wives and the kids, and that's how it should be. And I said, I'm just so worried because that is not my story. And I don't know if it will ever be my story. And he said something to me, and it was so simple, but he was absolutely spot on. He's like, Wendy, you just keep praying and believing that God is going to win him over, that he is going to capture his heart, that he's going to save your husband. Just keep praying. And I did. I kept praying every day. I was very, very, very committed to praying for him every day. And it wasn't until I think at that point, it was maybe 4 years later, 3 or 4 years later, we were in a completely different church. Now he was coming with me about every other weekend, which was fine with me. Like I considered that a win. And it was at a Sunday service that the pastor said, okay, they were in a marriage series. And he said, I'm going to have all of the couples stand up. And so all of the couples stood up, and he did this kind of vow renewal with all the couples in the congregation that wanted to renew their vows. And I look over, and Trevor is just weeping. Now, this man never cries, never has emotion of any sort of that kind. And he's weeping. And I'm like, why is he crying? And he's like, I'm so sorry. And he kept saying that over and over. And I thought, what do I don't even know if I want to know what you're sorry for. I honestly, I was scared to know what he was sorry for. And he just kept saying, I'm sorry. And I said, it's okay. We'll talk about it after church. And he's like, I've got to talk about it right now. And he said, I never knew. I never knew that if I died tonight that I would not go to heaven. He said, I always thought that I was a good guy. I never killed anybody. I'd never committed any great sin. I always thought that that was my way to heaven. And it was in that moment that, of course, God got a hold of him. And so for me, it really mattered that I prayed for him all of those years, because look at what the Lord did, right? So praying for him and letting him know that you are praying for him. And then if he is not okay with it, you keep being faithful to do your part. That is what we can continue to do. A few other just real practical things. Refuse to criticize or critique the way that he chooses to lead. Again, I think is important. And I think especially don't ever criticize him or condemn the way he does things in front of your children or in front of other people. Boy, is that a way that we can dishonor him in a heartbeat and dishonor the Lord in the process of that. So never critique or criticize the manner in which he chooses. Be Jesus. Be Jesus with skin on. That's what I'm always saying. Be Jesus. Make good choices. Pray that you can be the light that he needs to see. And then don't nag on him. I think that is another tendency we have, is to nag. Like, we'll even set boundaries that we don't realize we're even setting. We'll say, okay, like by the end of the year, he better have his act together. Stop with that. Like you allow God to work on God's time with him and with his heart. And in the process, you support him in that process. So remember your position, remember his position, and remember more than anything else, you're honoring Jesus by honoring him. That is the way in which we honor God best, is to honoring through our spouse. So that was a long answer.
Very good. Uh,
Oh,
I heard a lot of patience. Patience just kept coming up um, in what you were saying, and this next question is all about patience. And this
Mm-hmm.
person says, "I feel like I lose patience with my husband. He
Mm,
asks me, and I'll answer. Then he'll ask someone else and get a different answer,
yeah.
like he doesn't believe me
Yeah.
with this."
Mm, yeah. That's a hard one. That's a hard one. Um, and I remember when I read that question and I thought, yeah, this is probably years in the making. This person has probably been feeling this way for a long time. This has probably been going on for a very long time. And my heart hurts because I have been there. I've been through a similar situation, just in relationships, not even with marital relationships, just in relationships in general. Um, I just think communication is key. I think communication, letting him know this is how I feel when you do this. The thing with sharing how you feel with someone is that they can't come back and say, no, I don't make you feel that way, because it's your feelings, right? That's how I feel. And you can't say that I don't feel that. I do feel this, and it is very real. And it hurts me, when you talk to other people, when you get other opinions and you trust those opinions over mine. So I think having that open communication about that is very important. Um, I think that um, expressing your expectation also, I think, is good, because I think sometimes we have unspoken expectations
Right.
that are unrealistic expectations that we never share. And so then when they do happen, we get really mad, but they didn't know because we didn't share it. So I think that maybe historically, this has been what has happened, and she has remained silent about it and just been silently frustrated over it. I would say just open those lines of communication and say, it really hurts me when you don't trust me. Um, I think our bent is to say, well, if you don't trust me, we don't have a relationship, or you better trust me because that's just how a marriage works. Or we compare to somebody else's relationship. That's another one. I think the comparison game. Like, well, they don't do it that way, or they don't deal with those kinds of issues. The truth is, we all deal with those issues. Some of us navigate them better than others. Um, and I think it also matters if they are a Christ follower or not, and I think that, again, the standard, that's why it really matters being in a relationship where you are equally yoked, because you are one, and you are to be holding one another to the biblical standard, to what God's word says. And it's very tricky when you're trying to balance that in a relationship where one spouse is not saved, because your values, your, um, kind of the standards that you put on the way you live your life through the lens of scripture is not, you can't hold him to that same standard. And that's where it gets tricky, because you are to be one and equally yoked. But again, that's a whole nother conversation. But I think, keeping those lines of communication open and knowing that you have expressed your emotions and your feelings on it is key for that, for sure.
That's great.
Yeah.
My next question, or the next question, is this comes, it's on the same lines of marriage, but this is before marriage. And the question is, what are some good questions to ask each other and discuss before getting
Mm,
married?
yeah, yeah, that's good. This is a great question. And we worked with premarital counseling, premarital mentoring, couples all of the time when my husband and I did this for our church. I think number one for me, just number one out of the gate, is Jesus real to you? That's something obviously that I'm constantly going back to, that you're hearing me constantly say. But is he real? Is your relationship with him a priority? Um, is your spouse saved? Does he have a relationship with Christ? I mean, I think that we ask that right away. We ask that long before, of course, marriage. We even, before heavily dating, we ask that question. But I think that is something that is very important is Jesus real? And how important is that is you walking out your faith? How important is that in your everyday life? And what does it practically look like? I think
Right.
for everybody that's a little bit different. How do you practically walk out your faith with the Lord? I think number two, how many children do you want? But I don't even think it's about a numerical value so much as is it a priority to have children? And then why do we want it? What is the reason we're blessing the earth with more children,
Right.
right? And truly I learned this from my daughter and from her relationship with her husband. They've only been married 4 years. They have 3 kids, 3 under 3. Whether or not that was planned that way, I don't know for sure. But they have this great desire to pass along to the next generation their morals, their standards, their love of Jesus. And of course, the best way that we can ensure that our faith and our the great gospel itself is taken out into the world is by having children, right? Is by feeding into that next generation. And so I think that is a question. Are children a priority? Not how many so much as why do we want to have children? Like what is the reason? What do we want to accomplish by having children? Is it just to have children because we like kids, or is it to actually be seed planters with those children to go and make disciples and to change the world? I think that is something that, at least for my daughter, she takes on that responsibility kind of raising boys, 3 boys under 3. She said, we are in debt. We are in this dire need in our society for godly men. And so that's their desire, is to raise God-fearing, Jesus-loving, Bible-reading, faith champions, for the next generation. So we want to raise good children. Um, I think also a question, or maybe not so much a question as it is just kind of a standard, is to set good priorities. Have those questions asked, like what quality time looks like, and what is the price of marriage for you? What do you think it's going to cost you to get
Right.
married? Is there something that you're going to have to give up? Is there a sacrifice here that's being made? And then what does that look like? I remember when my husband and I first got together, even long before we got engaged, we started dating, and then 1 year later, almost to the day, we got engaged, and then almost 1 year to that day, we got married. And for I'd say the first year, we would have these conversations about praise the Lord, we both came from unbroken families. Like we came from very solid families where our mom and dad stayed married, and they never divorced. And so we didn't have that, we didn't have that. Now, it didn't mean that it didn't come with its set of problems, that they came with their set of problems. But we made a determination very early on. We're like, if we get married, we're in this for the long haul. Like, divorce isn't an option. We don't even talk about it. It's never something that we've even in anger said, never. So I feel very blessed to be able to say that. I think another question is, what do you want out of marriage? Like, what do you want out of this relationship? What is
Right.
the reason that you're getting married? Are you getting married because we've been engaged for 3 years and your friends are like, okay, it's time, you need to get married? Are you getting married for financial reasons? I mean, what is your reason? I think that's important. Um, I think, what does biblical love and respect look like? What's the shared viewpoint of the man being the shepherd and leading well, leading his family spiritually, and the woman living in submission to her spouse? I think that's conversation you have to have early on. What are kind of the role responsibilities, and the expectations for what I am to be for you and what you are to be for me? Because it's not just one-sided, right? And then what does it this was a really practical one, is what does being in love mean? I think that early on we're like, oh, we're just in love. Oh, we're just in love. Isn't he great? Isn't she wonderful? And then you get married and you realize that like, I love you and I'm obsessed with you doesn't live on through the years. Like yes, love grows if you feed into it and
Right.
you tend to it well. And I can honestly say that almost 30 years later, I love him more than I did 10 years ago, more than I did 5 years ago. Certainly more than I did probably as that 24-year-old girl getting married. Um, but I think being in love lasts you about this long. And then you have to really put the footwork in, and you really have to do the work. Um, and so I think that I would say, what does it mean to be in love? Like, what does that mean to you? I remember early on when my husband and I got married, and this is something that frustrated me in the beginning. I would say, I love you all of the time, like all day, every day, all day. And because I am often validated through words and of affirmation, I wanted him to be able to say, I love you back, right? I love you too. And sometimes instead of saying that, he would say, thank you. And I would think to myself, oh, no, you didn't. No, you didn't just say that. Like, don't you have something else that you want to follow that up with? And he taught me very early on, I don't want to ever say it just because it's words to say. When I say it, and he said, it's not that I don't mean it, but when I say it, I want there to be emotion behind it. I want you to know. I want it to be rooted in this deep affection and this place of honor. I don't want it just to be, again, what we talked about earlier, something that you flippantly say. I want it to really matter. And so that is something that kind of has become, you know, our mantra. Is sometimes he'll say, thank you. And I'll go, you're welcome. um, and then the last one is, what is your plan to regularly invest in your relationship? Like, what are we going to do to actively invest in this? Date nights, again, shared activities, whatever that looks like for you. Like, how are we physically, emotionally, spiritually, how are we going to invest in this relationship long term? Have a plan, you know, have a plan.
That's great. That's great. You had talked about earlier that you and Trevor were in charge of a small group per
Hmm.
se.
Hmm.
And what would you say that maybe you could encourage another pastor and pastor's wife with some ideas
Oh,
um,
yeah.
to encourage them to maybe give them an idea or two of something that maybe you and Trevor did in the past that worked for you that would encourage them.
Encourage your pastor. Okay. I think that there are so many things that you can do to encourage your pastor, or to encourage your leaders, or your mentor, people that you look up to, people that you are advancing spiritually because of their investment in you. I think, and I wrote down just a few things. I think, and this is really practical, but I think donating or feeding into their ministry of any kind, maybe it's serving, maybe it is just prayer supporting them, or maybe it's financially giving to their ministry. I think that is a way you love them. I think that that's the way you honor them, for sure. I think giving them some, again, very, very practical, but giving them like a free date night out. Maybe it's watching their kids for them while they go out on a date, or maybe it's giving them a gift certificate so that they can go out and enjoy. I think that we have this. I think that we have this tendency in our society to believe that spiritual leaders, especially, like, have it all together, and they already do those things and they do them well because they teach those things. Um, but they struggle just as much as the next guy. And so I think that, looking for ways that you can honor them by serving them, and just, those practical things. Again, offering childcare if they have young children. I think another really thing, and this is maybe less practical, tell them what you have learned from them. Like, tell them what you have appreciated about things that you have learned from them. Um, I would do this a lot with the pastor that I served under at our church when I was on staff at a church for many years. I would always, we would have a meeting together, usually every Tuesday morning. And I would always try to begin the meeting by saying, I really liked what you said when you said that on Sunday. Not only does he then know that I was paying attention, because again, I think, a lot of times, especially for staff members, right? Like, we check out because we're working, or we check out because we're doing other things. Even in my ministry, I've seen where I've had teams in the past, or I've had people that have served under me in the past, where maybe they couldn't get to the meeting that we were in, or maybe they couldn't get to any live event that I was a part of, that I spoke at, because they were busy doing the work.
Right.
But I think knowing that they fed themselves at, they fed themselves, that they got something from what you had to say. I think that's very important. um Asking them specifically how you can be praying for them, I think that is huge. Specifically, not just, hey pastor, I'm praying for you, or hey leader, I'm praying for you, but like, I am praying for, um you know your kid was sick last week, right? And you remember that. It's something that you
Right.
remember. Like, I know that when, and Krissie, I'll just tell on you, you're very good with this. Hey, how is, I just asked for prayer from our team a couple days ago. My Roman, my 3-year-old, almost 3-year-old grandson was sick. And so I said, I pray for Roman, and for you to come back and say, hey, how is Roman feeling? That's huge.
Yeah.
I think that we ask for prayer a lot, and we pray for people a lot, but we don't ask the follow-up questions. Like, what happened with that? Like, we just kind of ride into the sunset with it. And so I think that praying specifically for them, and then following up with them weeks later. How are you doing? I've been praying for that. And pray for your spiritual leaders. Like, right now more than ever, like, there is an attack on spiritual leaders like we've never seen. Um, so for sure. Um, and then again, I think offering practical services, cleaning their office, washing their car. I mean, I know that sounds silly, but like, again, those acts of service really
Yeah.
speak to honoring someone well, and realizing that no one is above or below. Like, we're all on the same playing field. We're all like, what is it that I'm always saying? We're all just walking each other home. At the end of the day, that's really what it is. And he doesn't want you thinking that he's up here and you're this lowly shepherd, or this lowly sheep down here and he's the shepherd. He wants to know that, that you all are on this common kind of playing field. So clean their office, clean their car, do yard work, plant flowers for them, offer a meal, like, just real practical things. So
That's excellent. Very good information. Very good.
yeah.
Um, I want to flip this over real quick to maybe parenting and family
Yeah.
members. I know that these questions come up a lot too, especially on what we can do when we have a family member that wants to live in sin
Mm,
and maybe still want to interact with the family, but the family's not, they don't know how to interact with that person.
yeah. 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 I think it goes back to just being Jesus. I think, we tend to think we have to say something wonderful, we have to offer something wonderful. I think that we think that we have to take this Bible and beat them over the head with it, because,
Right.
and I think that comes from a good place. I really think it comes from a good place. At least I can speak to myself, that I honestly want people to experience what I've had the privilege of experiencing. I want people to awaken the way that I've been able to awaken. Um, and so I think it comes from a genuine desire. Um,
Hmm.
but I think that, there are certain things, I think, that for us as a family, that we would have to draw a line in the sand with. But there are other things, like, I think we have to choose our battles well. Maybe is that what I want to say? Um, I know that there are plenty of unbelievers within our families, within my husband's family and my own, where we simply don't agree. We simply don't see eye to eye. We simply can't um, get into heated debates because it's going to be a lose-lose for everyone involved. Um, and again, that goes to, are they believers or not? Some in my family are hard-headed, and they say they're believers, but then by fruit, because fruit doesn't lie, that they're not walking with Jesus. And so, that is kind of, you deal with that situation a little bit differently, where I believe you do have conversations that are more hard and more challenging with them, to say that if you are representing Christ, if you are claiming to represent the family for which I am a part of, family meaning Christ's family, then there are some things that you're going to have to be held accountable to. But I think that if we're talking about unbelievers living in sin, we love them, we pray for them, we recognize uh, that they just don't know, and that is a thread of a conversation, an ongoing conversation that I've been having for months now. And I think that God is shifting my heart in that direction, because I have a natural tendency to um to be done with people quickly,
Yeah.
who don't they won't come around, want to argue every time you're with them. And so my natural human bent is to be like, okay, well, I just don't have time. The truth of the matter is, if we as Christ followers don't have time, then who is going to have time for them? And the time has never been more important. I'll give you a little story, just a really brief story. I have and I wrote about this, that's going up on the kitchen table page this weekend, and I'm kind of putting this challenge out to everybody that sits around the table, to pray for people. And here's what I want to say about it. So I was scrolling on Facebook one day, and I came across, and this was sometime last week, came across a profile of a person that I went to elementary school with. Now, I haven't seen her or talked to her or had any engagement with her in probably 30 years. But we're friends on Facebook, as you know, you are, even people that you don't really know. And so I happened upon her profile. Now, there is a reason I feel like I landed on her profile, because I saw a picture of her daughter on her first day of school. And on the porch behind her, because I'm all about aesthetic, right? So like I'm looking at the porch, and I'm looking at the flowers, I'm looking at all the stuff. And I look at the bottom right corner, is this very demonic looking statue. And I have to say, my natural bent would be up, write her off, right? Because like, she's demonic, like she probably is a Satan worshiper. She probably doesn't, of course, like that's where I would normally go. And all of a sudden in my head, I thought to myself, like everything that I had been seeing her post on social media for the last couple years made sense based on what I saw in one little picture that the Lord would have
Right.
me. And it was in that moment that my heart broke. And I feel like every one of our hearts ought to break for deception, for not knowing Jesus for themselves, for living in darkness. Our hearts should hurt for that. And so my challenge that I'm kind of putting forth for everybody sitting around the kitchen table, which is the Facebook group that I run, is, can we choose 3 people that we know by name and pray for them for 30 days? Pray for God to do a miracle work in their life. Pray to God that they will come to a saving knowledge of Him. Um, because if we don't pray for them, we might be the only people who are praying for them, right? And so I think like that's one answer, is really having a compassion for the people who don't know Him, who you believe could have an experience that you've been privileged to experience. But then again, I think that there's this second piece where, again, we draw the line in the sand. So if we were invited, let's say, to a marriage between 2 same-sex partners,
Mhm.
I would decline to go.
Right.
And of course, the reason why I would decline to go, everybody would say, well, yeah, you follow Christ. Of course, you're going to decline to go. But it's deeper than that. It is that I cannot rightly um, I cannot rightly stand behind a union that actually God abhors.
Right.
And so while I might be taking a stance that looks like division and divisiveness and hate, the greatest way that I can love them is staying true to my God and my faith and my Jesus. And so the greatest gift we give, if we say we're going to be Jesus with skin on, we're going to be Jesus for people, that's the practical way we live that out. And we just say there are standards that I will not violate this standard. I will not subvert the Lord's command and the Lord's demand for me as a Christ follower in this moment. And that might mean losing people. That might mean them thinking wrongly. And I'm okay with being looked at wrongly by the world if it means being looked rightly by God. So yeah, I think yeah, I think that that's what I would say.
It's a great piece of advice. I think that we're all us moms in the world. We're always worried about how we're raising our children in this day and age.
Yeah,
What is
absolutely.
one piece of advice that you have for raising a child?
Mm. Um, whew, just one.
Right.
I have a whole bunch swirling in my mind. Um, Making sure that they know that you love Jesus.
Amen.
Yeah. I think that sometimes our tendency is to um subcategorize or to lump into categories our life, right? Where this is our Christian life on Sunday morning, this is our
Yeah.
mom life on Monday, this is Friday night, this is marriage focused. We tend to compartmentalize. And I think our kids need to know that we love him first
Yeah.
and that we love him most, and that comes before our spouse, that comes before them. That is the priority. They have to see us make mistakes and be sorry. They have to, that's how they learn forgiveness.
Mm.
I think they have to see us fail, but they also have to see our victories, and they have to understand the victories come by bended knee. They have to see us pray. Um, they have to see us cry out to God. I'll never forget being in a hospital with my husband, who almost died after a very traumatic surgical procedure in 2009. My daughter had just turned 9 that summer, and he was on a business trip for his job at the time, and so his work flew us out to Arizona, where he was on this business trip, and he had this emergency surgery. And we thought we were coming to see Daddy recovering in a recovery room, but instead we came to a hospital room where he was in the ICU because they had to reintubate him because they almost lost him. He actually flatlined on the table. And I was a mess. I was a mess. I was a wreck. And I mean, I couldn't breathe. I remember the nurse handing me this little bag. Like, I will never get the image out of my mind of getting this little bag that she gave me filled with his personal items. Like everything about him was in this little bag. And his ring was in there, and his belt was in there, and just like these personal things. And I just remember breaking down, and we got back to the hotel room where my husband had been staying with his rental car that he had had. And I was trying to figure out how I was going to live this out like Jesus
Yeah.
with my 9-year-old daughter. And I have to say that I did it wrong. I think that there's a lot of things I would have done differently, but I will never forget laying in bed with her and her stroking my hair as I sobbed. She was stroking my hair, like 9-year-old, and what, I was like 35. And her telling me, Mama, it's going to be okay. And so I think allowing them to see you process suffering well,
Yeah.
and to have them see you make mistakes, but to continue in those mistakes, glorifying God the best way that you can. That's number one. Just number one. I think that if you don't do anything else, if you don't do anything else, if you don't get the lunches right and you don't get their friends' names right and you don't, you're not that cool mom and you don't do all the other, I think that if you stay faithful to glorifying God and showing them how to do it well, you will win. Hands down, you'll win.
Definitely. Another question while we're talking about parenting, another question that was asked was, how do I parent my child to be a good wife in a godly way with a spouse who is not on the same Christian path, unequally yoked?
Mhm. And they're married already. That was the question. They're married already.
Yeah, how do I parent my child and be a good wife, to be a good wife in a godly way with a spouse who is not on the same Christian path?
Yeah. Again, I think it goes back to the same question that we
Yeah,
had earlier and the same answers. Um, I think that, I can't wrap my brain around that because I'm so fortunate and so blessed to have such a great God honoring son-in-law. But I do know that in prior relationships like my daughter has had, that you just see the red flags, and
yeah,
again, I think we see things from a different perspective. We see things more at a 3,000-foot view when they're seeing it from a very a 5-foot view or a 10-foot view. Um, and I think that being very prayerful, I think praying for her, but also praying with her, to kind of be that guide. This is what we do. We pray. We believe that God is in the business of redeeming and saving, and we're believing that for your spouse. And I think also this is maybe one thing that I would say. Um, Try to be very wise with what you say to
right.
her, because our natural bent, she's our daughter,
That's
our
right.
natural bent is to protect her, to side with her, to give her advice that may not be the advice that she needs to hear, simply because our emotion in it is more intense because she is our child. So what I learned throughout the years, and this is just, I think, general relationships, not just with spouse, but with anybody. When your child is going through something with someone,
Mm,
um, to watch what you say about that other person to them.
yeah,
Um, I kind of messed up on this once or twice or maybe a half dozen times with my daughter, where she'd come home from school and she'd be in a real disaster area with a friend or with a boyfriend or with whatever, and I would then say, well, I can't believe them, and I never liked them anyway, and they did this, and you want to take her side.
right.
But I think what you need to do is point to scripture and say, let's see what God has to say.
Amen.
And always bring it back to that, because inevitably she's going to reconcile with that person, and she's going to remember that, boy, you didn't like them, or boy, you didn't have very nice things to say, and then you are held accountable to the things that you say. And so I think that if he is your son-in-law, you have just as great of an obligation to him as you do to her, because they are a union, they are one. And so
Yeah,
you say, we're going to pray. This is how we're going to pray. And I'm going to refuse to criticize, condemn, to share my feelings or my emotions, because they're not even part of they shouldn't even be part of the equation at that point. So, yeah.
yeah. The next question I have is, how can we help our son who is struggling with mind healthy and unhealthy thinking patterns and extreme anxiety and fear due to thinking?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I think I think that this one is tricky, and I think again it goes to whether or not your son is a believer. I think that is always, always what we want to start with. And I think mental health issues are serious issues, but I think that they are handled differently when you are a believer than when you are an unbeliever.
Yeah.
Um, the first thing that I would say is right out of the gate, I would say that I've had people who have asked me this in the past. How can I pray? How can I invest? What scriptures can I pray over them? And I do have a list of scriptures that I have given to people in the past for people that want to pray for their son or their daughter who is going through something. I think that we do want to take seriously their issues that they are having. And I know that there are a lot of women who deal with this with their children. So if that is something that you want, I will make available that to you. It's a great list to have, prayers that you can be praying for your kids, and then scripture that kind of back up and validate those prayers. Um, Again, I think it matters if he's saved or not, but it also matters how old he is and
Yeah.
is in your home. I think that there's limited things that we can do when they are no longer in our home, or they are adult children, more so than if they are in our home and they are younger. I would say that if he is young and living with you, give him space and give him freedom to know that you are there for him and that your door is always open. And understand that he might not do that. He might not confide in you. He might not tell you things. I think that we place again this
Yeah.
unrealistic expectation that we are our kid's best friend, that we are the go-to person for them. They might have someone else that they can more readily go to. That might be an uncle, a cousin, a friend, the pastor, a youth pastor, a youth ministry worker. So it doesn't necessarily have to be you. Um, so I think making sure they know your door is open, making sure that they have that space and that freedom to talk and to share and to confide in you, and that you aren't going to be judgmental and you aren't going to condemn them for the way that they feel. At the same point, if they are believers, you're not going to pacify those feelings. You're not going to allow for that to be the end, um meaning that's not going to be kind of the word spoken over their life, that they are believers and we are going to go look to see what the word says. But knowing that your door is always open for him. I think again it goes back to living consistently with Jesus yourself. When our kids see this ebb and flow, they begin to question, is it real? When they see us fluctuate and stay inconsistent with our faith, they begin to question and doubt, and they begin to again, doubt is very much placed in their heads, and so we have to live consistently with Jesus. Um, and again, let that do the work without pushing this agenda on them. Let your life shining for Christ do the work itself
Yeah.
without pushing this agenda or this expectation onto them. Again, we get frustrated when especially we see other kids that are honoring their parents or other kids that are rightly following the Lord when we don't have kids that are. And so the tendency then is to be so frustrated by that we would place unrealistic expectations, and we just need to not do that. And I think too, another really, this is just a really practical thing, is to say no again to more, in order to say yes to him. Maybe that is unbusying and uncomplicating your schedule. I think that we live in a society where we think the more is better. Like we think, oh, we have to have him in this activity. Oh, I need to sign him up for this. And always he needs to play travel ball at the same time he's doing this and that. You can say no. And the fact is, if he is in your home and you're responsible for him, you are the responsible parent to say no. Like
Right.
he's gonna probably say yes. My kid, the kids at school are doing it, my friends are doing it. That's great. But if you are going through this mess and you are going through this turmoil and you are experiencing these mental health issues, that has to take priority. And so
Right.
figure out how we work through that, but we need space and time and rest to do that. So we just uncomplicate and unbusy our lives. And I think that's practical to just about anything, that we
Yeah.
want to invest in our life. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Now we've talked about the healthy and unhealthy mind patterns, and the next question that it's reading specifically, how to discipline a willed tornado walking in my life as a mama.
A willed tornado. How do I parent this tornado? Well,
Right.
let me just tell you, we have a tornado of a grandson. Roman is our tornado. In fact, when he was down the other day, it was so sad to see him so sad because we're so used to him being a tornado. Um, I think you always point to Jesus. I mean, that will always be what I say first. You always point to Jesus. You make sure that you are praying with your children, not just praying for them, praying with them. They have to see you praying with them. My daughter's really good at this, where she will say, "Should we ask forgiveness from the Lord right now in this moment because we're kind of disobeying Mama right in this moment." I think that is that starts as easy like as a year old, like as soon as they know that you, as soon as they can rationalize what you're saying and they can understand words, I think that you begin to pray with them and you begin to let them pray the way that they need to pray. Like I remember when when we were teaching Roman to pray at dinner time. And it's so funny because he would hold all of us accountable. Like we'd sit
Right.
down to dinner, and there'd be this mass of us sitting down to dinner, and he'd go, no, he doesn't say words yet. Really, well, he says words. He doesn't say full sentences at this point, so it's just a grunt. But he does this, and so it's holding us accountable to, and that's really evident, I think, of the work that she's doing with
Right.
praying for them routinely or praying with them routinely. Admit when you're wrong. um Huge, but I've repeated that one.
Right.
I'd say this: limit the noise and reduce the overactivity or the overstimulation. That
Yeah.
is the thing we had to do with my daughter. She was very easily overstimulated. And a great example of this is I took her to the American Girl doll uh, store in Chicago. Like it's like 3 stories tall. It has a beauty salon in it. It has a big theater in it. It has, from floor to ceiling, it has all these dolls that you can purchase. And I was just excited. And so we go in there and I'm like, isn't this awesome? And she's like, no. And she just starts crying. Well, she was overstimulated. She was overworked, and there was too much going on. And,
Yeah.
and we've seen that development kind of in our grandkids, where they, like, especially Roman, you can see where he's got too much that he's trying to process in his
Yeah.
brain. And so I think that, again, you don't have them involved in everything. You don't say yes to everything. But you give yourself space to give them undivided attention, where it's just the two of you, and you reduce that stimulation. I think also, because you asked about that mama, I think in that second part was about the calling of a mama and how to kind of um how to be, how to kind of how to kind of know your calling as a mama, which I think goes hand in hand with that. And that is, know the importance of your role as a mom. I think especially for stay-at-home moms, we think we don't take seriously our roles sometimes. And I think that's very important that we stay true to our roles, and we understand the importance. Thank God every day for giving you the gift of these children. For praying that you would have that in that kind of that parenting role, there would be more of him and less of you, in your parenting style, that you would make sure that your kids always know, and more importantly, see your practical faith lived out on an everyday basis. And I wanted to give kind of a little plug here. There is a lady that I follow over on Instagram who does this remarkably well. She has 3 young kids. They're all under the age of like 7 or 8. You can find her on Instagram. Her name is Felicia Masonheimer, and she is a Christian author, speaker, writer, communicator, influencer. And she has a great course that you can take, I think, on parenting young children well. And so I just wanted to give that little plug, because she's phenomenal at that, for sure, at the parenting aspect. So
It's great. How about friendships? Some of us, this question says, I'm having a hard time making new friends since leaving behind toxic people.
Mm.
I thought going to church and fellowship would help me to gain new friends, and I'm pretty much homebound. Trying
Mm.
to use Facebook hasn't helped much, but it doesn't help much either because I don't get much interaction. What would you suggest?
Wow. I think that's hard. And I think that, since COVID, there's been a lot of ways that have made it easier for us to connect with people because we've recognized that, things like Zoom, things like, FaceTime, things like that. Um, I think I would say this: reduce the expectations and increase your responsibility.
Yeah,
To recognize that, and I'm not saying that this was her at all. I don't know who this was, but I would say that I've been there before where I place these expectations on what I think a relationship ought to look like, or even that a relationship that I so want doesn't develop the way that I think that it should. I think that we quit making it about what other people aren't doing,
right.
um, and we do the work by actively engaging ourselves, reaching out. Um, I think about when I was in fifth grade and I moved to a new subdivision. And I know that this is very elementary, but I moved to a new subdivision. I was scared to death of all my neighbors because all my neighbors seemed to be friends with one another, and I was the odd man out, right? And so I was afraid. And so my dad said, "Hey, if you don't walk up to them, they probably will never walk up to you." And so I had to go over and I introduced myself to Renee, who happened to be lived two streets over, and we became the best of friends. We're still friends to this day. So I think that we quit looking for them and what they're not doing and what they're not engaging. I post and they don't like it, or they don't do this. I think instead of that, we're going at it with the wrong mindset. Look at what I can do, how I can reach out, what I can say, what I can engage with, how I can send a text or an email or say, hey, can we exchange numbers? And being brave to do that, being vulnerable with people, being honest with people, I think is very important. Being sincerely interested in what other people are interested in. Say, hey, I saw that you liked this or liked that. I am one that's always an advocate for hooking people up, like, right, like I did this big thing, you remember last year, where I was like, hey, you don't have a mentor, you don't have a friend, you don't have somebody to do Bible study with you. I want to let this be a platform where you can find somebody. And so I feel like we're never, in the society that we live in today, we're never absent or devoid of connection. We just have to be willing to do our part in it, and so reduce the expectation, increase your personal responsibility, for sure.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Definitely. Kind of putting it back on ourselves to do the
Yes,
work.
that's right. Yes, absolutely.
Well, I appreciate you answering all these questions from these women.
Yay,
You
we're
that
done. Yeah, we went through them all. That was a lot. And I know that this is going to be a long video.
but
But
so good.
yeah,
Such
and
great questions and
yeah.
the answers, and I'm just hoping that this helps each and every one of them.
Yes, me too. Me too. Well, friends, this is the end of this video. We are so glad that you have been with us. We thank you that if you've made it to the very end, you are the champion because this has been a lot. We could probably actually have done this in a two-part series. Maybe we will do that next time, but I wanted to make sure to get all of these questions answered for you. Again, I am so glad that you are here. If you are not already part of our kitchen table page, the page that we have on Facebook, you will want to be a part of that. That is where we do study challenges, we do Zoom classes, we offer all kinds of freebies. I talk about my monthly study bundles that we do every single month that are like devotions that help you to engage with the Word of God. This will be the place where you can gain community. And I promise it is the best place to be on the internet, if I do say so myself. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, become a part of this growing family on YouTube, and do yourself a favor. Make sure that you hit that notification bell below to be notified for every time that I upload content like this and other content that I have. Go ahead and click on all of the other videos that we have. And I would really encourage you to look at our Godly Wife series. I did an entire series a couple years ago on how to be a godly wife. There are 4 videos in that series, and I really encourage you to check that out, especially if you have liked some of what we have talked about today. With that being said, thank you, Krissie. I love you. I'm so grateful for you. I'm grateful for you every single day in my life and for what you bring to this ministry. And I'm so looking forward to what God has planned for us in the future. Between now and my next video, friends, I pray that you have an awesome day with Jesus. Bye, guys.